How's it going, nerds, and welcome to Nerd Central. This thing stinks!
Gaming consoles are one of the ways, if not the most preferred way, to play video games. If it's a game that is locked on a specific console, like, say, Spider-Man 2, or you just don't really feel like spending a pretty penny on building a PC tower, then a gaming console is definitely the right way to go.
I still firmly believe that PC gaming is the definitive way to play a video game, but sometimes you're a fan of Little Big Planet karting and you need a PS3. Notice the lack of me agreeing with that statement. Throughout the years, gaming consoles has seen very high highs and very low lows. And sometimes they were the virtual boy.
When it comes to a console low point, it usually comes from poor marketing decisions like the Wii U had, a terrible redesign like the Wii Mini, or just a console that had little to zero third-party support, causing the console to only have really one target audience. Or you could have just been Philips.
So today I thought I would go look back at those really high highs and really low lows that came out of the gaming console industry. But before we do that, I have two rules I need to lay down.
First rule, I have to give each console I talk about an equal amount of talking points. Only so I can take a whole video to talk about them one day, so I can keep the subject on a video game console in general and not just about that specific console. Second rule, I have to only talk about the consoles that massively affected the gaming industry as an entirety. I really don't want to talk about a console that really didn't evolve the video game industry, because then it comes back to the problem with ending up making a video seem like I am talking about that specific console. Another note, most of the ideas I talk about in this video are based around my experience with that console and opinions on each console themselves. Yes, I will still take in consideration what the general public thinks about each one, but I really want to talk about how I feel about each console, so apologies ahead of time if you don't agree with my statements.
So with all that out of the way, let's dive right into... It gets better, I swear. The Atari 2600, the console that many consider the start of the home console entertainment experience. Those goddamn savages. Released on September 11th, 1977 in North America, the Atari 2600 was, at the time, the definitive way to play your favorite arcade games at home. Massive hint here. I said at the time. Yeah, the Atari 2600 does not age well at all. Especially with the arcade ports becoming more of a downgrade on this console to what people were used to, even at the time. Most of the sales came from it having Breakout and Pong, because it definitely wasn't this. But that's really all I have to say about the whole thing, though. Personally, I don't enjoy using this thing. It's a gratifying collectible to have just based off of its gaming status. Most of the games have not aged well at all, the graphics have not aged well at all, and there are already better, more efficient ways to play the games that really made this console popular in the first place. The Atari 2600 gets a 5 out of 10 for me. This rating would be lower, but I will give it a pass because it had a lot to accomplish at the time. Video game consoles at home weren't really around for a long time prior, so it had to set some sort of standard. Fast forwarding to the year 1985 with the release of Jesus himself, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the first system to give us game series like Mario, Mega Man, The Legend of Zelda, and so many more. Originally, this console was released in 1983 as the Famicom in Japan, but 2 years later we got the NES redesign / rebrand and release we know and love today in North America. These consoles were the first experience into the world of 8-bit gaming, allowing for more comfort when it came to the usage of your eyeballs. This was also many people's first experience into the video game world, especially with the company that created it, Nintendo. I won't go into full detail in history with Nintendo because I would like to save that for an entire video, so comment down below if you want to see that. Not only was this a massive step forward for the gaming industry, but it also set a new precedent that other consoles that were released after it needed to follow. And I mean needed. Except the Power Glove, that thing needs to stay in hell and rot. Speaking of the Power Glove, the NES also got an overabundance of accessories and was one of the first to start that trend. The NES Zapper, the NES Advantage, the NES Max, Rob, and the NES Power Pad, just to name a few. Yes, not all of these accessories worked or were utilized greatly, but they were still memorable nonetheless. I mean, we all remember how terrible the Power Glove is! I swear to God, I will not stop talking about that piece of shit. For a console that holds pure nostalgia factors in every single orifice, I had a hard time figuring out where to rank it, but I came, that's what she said, to the conclusion of an 8 out of 10. Just because it had a couple of duds does not take away the fact that this thing revolutionized the gaming industry as a whole. With its memorabilia, the many game series that started on this console, and the many precedents that it gave gaming developers, this thing was definitely Nintendo's magnum opus. Next up, we got another console that gave birth to a bunch of long-lasting franchises. Oh, shoot. Forgot to take out the plural in franchises. The Sega Genesis, the first console out of what I like to call the Sega trilogy of consoles. Put up a trilogy that I have strong feelings over, so it kind of represents how I feel about this trilogy. Released in Japan in 1988 and in North America in 1989, the Sega Mega Drive, aka the Sega Genesis depending on where you live in the world, was the first major console to give us 16-bit gameplay. I say major because the TurboGrafx 16 was technically the first to have 6-bit games, plus the TurboGrafx 16 only sold over 5 million units, whereas the Sega Genesis only sold over 30 million units 2 years later. To most people, this was their first experience with 16 bits. But the Sega Genesis having 16 bits allowed for more detailed graphics and gave us our first look at this little blue piece of shit. Yup, that Sonic the Hedgehog got his debut on Sega Genesis in 1991 and is the only reason Sega is in business today. That's it. Yeah, this comment section is not gonna be viewable for me. Okay, to be fair, this console has some absolute bangers that do not have Sonic in them. Streets of Rage, Contra, Street Fighter, and the Mortal Kombat games, just to name a few. But these games never became staples in the general public. Yeah, Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, but the Sega Genesis wasn't the reason for their existence, nor their popularity. They were really just pure arcade ports. Yes, gaming nerds like us will remember these games, but if I go up to a non-virgin and ask them if they can name more than 5 original games that were released on the Sega Genesis in under 10 seconds, what would they say other than Sonic? Earthworm Jim 2?
But just because it has some forgotten titles does not mean that it was one of the console's faults, far from it. It was because of how overshadowed this console really was. If this came out prior to the NES/Famicom era, then it probably would have become more of a household/memorable console to the general public. It also doesn't help that Sega doesn't really make consoles anymore, so a lot of these were buried along with the consoles themselves. To me, this thing is definitely not forgettable, but I have had so many conversations with people that do not know a lick of what I'm talking about when I gossip about it. Which is a shame because this puppy is riddled with incredible games that just never became household titles. But I never grew up with the Sega Genesis and was very late to the party with it, so my opinion could be complete bullshit. I just hear so many games that were created via the Sega Genesis that no one ever hears of today. It was really ended up being Sonic and a bunch of games that had either earlier status or weren't released via the Sega Genesis. The rank I give the Sega Genesis is a 7 out of 10. With an easy controller to get down and a massive library of games, it did satisfy me in the end, but it didn't blow my mind. I don't know, maybe I should spend more time with it. What do you think? Tell me in the comments.
Just released 1 year later from the North American release of the Sega Genesis, we see the long-awaited sequel to the NES, with the Super NES, or SNES, or Super Famicom, or Super Comboy, or Super Amazing Console that everyone should bow down to and need to agree on a damn name for this holy grail. Released in Japan and South Korea in 1990, North America in 1991, Europe and Oceania in 92, and Brazil in 1993, the Super Famicom Comboy Nintendo Entertainment System is widely known to be one of the best reasons for Nintendo's and the video game industry's success. It took everything that everyone agreed was pretty iffy about the NES/Famicom and fixed it entirely. Other than the use of the accessory support, this thing does everything that NES was great at and does what it did wrong perfectly. Giving us upgrades to the games we loved on the NES and Game Boy like Super Mario World, Koopa Superstar, Super Metroid, and Super Punch-Out!, but we also got introduced to some super influential Nintendo series on this puppy, like Super Mario Kart, Yoshi's Island, and Donkey Kong Country, were all beginners on this console. It was the reason for a lot of people's obsession with Nintendo as a game developer, and gave people a gaming experience that no other console at the time could really replicate. Yes, other consoles prior gave people a very satisfying gaming experience, but the SNES gave you a different feeling when you're playing it. When you first play Super Mario Bros., you get a different experience compared to when you first boot up Mario World. It's just a weird thing that I can't explain. But it's just the expression on your face when you see Yoshi on Mario on screen compared to when you just hear that doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. The controller is also an insanely great upgrade compared to the original NES controller. Just a simple few changes of button placement felt like a massive upgrade alone. The addition of the shoulder buttons and the extra X and Y buttons instantly became musts for gaming consoles moving forward. Unless you're PlayStation and just really like geometry more, I don't know. I want to save some more commentary about how awesome this console is for a future video, so let me just give you the obnoxious rating of a 9 out of 10. It really would have been a 10 out of 10 if this thing just had the same accessory support the NES had. Yes, it does have some greats like the Super Game Boy and the mouse and mouse pad, but they just weren't pushed to their fullest potential. It just doesn't scream the same amount of quality that the NES accessories gave us. Now, as we branch out of Virgin Airlines, I want to make sure all of the current passengers are caught up on the Sony PlayStation's backstory because, and parents, you're going to want to earmuff your kids for this one, it makes me want to fucking hurl.